Hey everybody, it's Thursday.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Night Bite.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Emily, if that's what we're doing here. And we are so excited to be here with you guys this evening. I don't know, to me, it feels like this week has been perpetually Monday. And I don't know why. I don't know why. I don't say that every week, so maybe it's just something about the week. But it was kind of a crazy week. We did have the eclipse that went through, and I saw quite a few people that had traveled and done stuff with that, and I saw quite a few fishing memes. And we always got to wonder: do the fish bite more or less, or this or that, or anything? But ultimately, there's not enough eclipses to really know any of those things. So if you had something crazy happen, let us know. Otherwise, the crazy thing that happened to us was just that we were back to fishing. We had a few weeks there where we're at, we try to not have a between seasons. Like we try to not have time between ice and open water because we have river systems and we're up north, so we should have ice for a while, but that's not how it worked out this year. And so we were super excited to be back to the river.
Yeah, it was awesome to shake the cobwebs out of the boat, and actually we had a pretty uneventful first run. Like we did okay with fishing, but as far as the boat went, it went fine. That was nice.
Well,
even remembered the plug this year.
Well, okay. And so I was kind of thinking all of those same things. And I think maybe people at home don't even know this. So maybe we can even share this. But what we did this year, I mean, first of all, it should be uneventful. Getting the boat out should be easy. There should be no problems. That is the goal every single time. But the unexpected, you can't expect the unexpected or something silly like that, right? And so, there's always things that pop up. This year, nothing popped up. And that was great. The other thing that we did is maybe because I'm a crazy person or whatever, but I made a checklist. So going into our first open water trip, what are the things that we need? Because late in the season, when it's summer, especially when it's fall, it feels like you've been in the boat 100 times in the year. And that's great, right? You're in a routine, you know what to take, you know what you do. But going out into that first boat season, that first boating day, we had written down all the different graphs, bring water, bring the plug, bring, the trolling remote, and make sure that it's charged, because that's the thing that you don't remember that trolling remote until you go to leave for that trip and you're like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. And so I think putting all those things down helped us to be organized. And you had referenced the year that we didn't have a plug, and because that is the other reason it's important to be so prepared. When you get to some of these boat launches, people are so excited to hit the water once it is open water that some of these launches fill up with boats. And so we all have this dream of getting to the launch and slowly backing up and getting our stuff ready and all those different things, right? But when there are so many people dying to use that launch, when you're in the river systems and the canal or the channel is narrow, you have to be ready for all those different steps because there isn't all that much time. And people will be nice. You got to be nice. Give people a minute to get their stuff together, but you can't just camp at those ramps and camp at the launches and all that because there's other people ready to use them.
Yeah, I mean, especially when there's open spots in the parking lot, it really doesn't take that much time to get all your stuff ready, to go through your checklist, and then pull your boat up to the ramp, put your boat in, park your truck, make sure that you have the launch fees. If you're here in Wisconsin, a lot of our launches require a fee just to keep for upkeep and whatnot. And then walk back to your boat. And a lot of times there's even a little bit of room, if you're by yourself, you can set your boat off to the side so you can let other people use the dock. Otherwise, like Emily and I, we fish together all the time. So Emily drives the boat off. She goes and tools away from the ramp a little bit, let people go in and out that are ready. And then she comes back and picks me up. And so just trying to keep it all flowing because everybody wants to get out fishing. Everybody, and it just is courteous. So that's one of those things. I did reference the boat plug.
Well, and because one year we were in a big rush. And so that's why we're talking about being prepared. And
we were rushing
launches, and that's what happened.
And so speaking of the boat plug, the one thing, so we came to the launch last year, had a primo spot, the first spot right next to the ramp.
In a jam-packed
perfect. It was
lot.
Perfect. We were so excited. put the boat in, pulled the truck right into the spot, and we started tooling. And then I'm like, oh crap, there's water on the floor. And that the only thing that means is that I forgot the boat plug. And that's, it happens. So you hit the bilge pump on. Luckily that works, because that's one thing that you should be testing is make sure that your bilge pump turns on and off. But one thing that did do is that I went out and I got a carabiner with a keychain and I hooked my boat keys onto the keychain, and now I hook my plug to my boat keys. So I can't start my boat without having a boat plug. I also have a second boat plug just floating around back by the transom, like in that little pocket area. There's just an extra one sitting there for whatever reason. If one rips out, we have to plug our boat from the outside, so you never know, something comes by and pulls your plug out and you need an extra one. But yeah, those
but
are
then
the things.
Also tell the person that you're boating with, because then I get in the boat and I see we're like launching in and I'm like, oh, the plug is sitting here and I'm trying to stop him. Wait. And then he stops the car. He's like, what's wrong? I'm like, the plug, it's already in. So it was pretty funny too.
Yeah.
But lots of really great tips coming in from people at home. So no matter what kind of launch you're at, first of all, the other thing is go and take a peek at it, because if there's a million boats going in and out, you can kind of bet that, maybe hopefully things will be fine. But, one of the things that we found is a different ramp than all these other stories, right? But we were at ramp just this weekend, and there were two lanes that you can use. And I think you, as the person who's backing up, prefers the right hand side and whatever that was being used. And so I don't know, you're good at this, so you instead use the left hand side.
Well, I prefer the side of the boat launch if I can. I always take note of where the wind's coming from, and I'd rather launch on the side that the wind's coming from, because it pushes your boat into the dock. So if Emily was,
I got the motor on and I'm off anyways.
Well, I just prefer that. That's my preference.
But where I'm going with this is that this was an instance that, well, I thought I was familiar with this launch and I hadn't been there yet this year, and I hadn't gone and looked at the ramp. And that seems like such a silly detail. But what had happened is probably over winter, people had gone and thrown little boulders, stones. Yeah, I can't call it a rock. It's not just rocks. Like a little thing. Yeah. They were directly in that lane right where the boat was launching. And so here's what happened is our boat, we have a 16.5-foot Alumacraft Classic, and we were able to get just barely over these stones. I think the motor fins just barely hit it, and I was like, yikes. And the boat was able to launch right over it. And I don't know if the trailer hit it or not, but we were able to really just get right by. Other people were more local than we were. They knew that those rocks were in that spot, but they were almost too deep to get without like going swimming, right? Nobody's really going swimming yet this year. And so instead, people were all using that right hand lane. And that's ultimately what we ended up doing too. But, going and checking those launches, because we spent all winter saying, don't throw rocks. But this is that time of year when you unfortunately run into them. Hopefully your auger didn't run into them when they were frozen in the ice, right? But that was kind of scary to have the boat go right over all those rocks, and we're like not using that side again.
Well, John's making a good point here, not to like transition topics too much, because apparently we're talking about like good early season practices, which is an awesome topic. But so he was making a point here, like having a copy of your fishing license, because there are specific waters, especially border waters, that you are required to have a paper copy of your license. You can't use, if you're a Wisconsin resident, you can't use your conservation card, or you can't use an online version. You have to have a paper copy. And so that's a great point. We keep one in a Ziploc in our bag that we bring on the boat. Just carry it all season long. What's the harm, having multiple versions of your license? So that's a great tip too. Speaking of though, so we are fishing over by the Green Bay, Oconto, Menominee, Marinette area, and the water temps were, when we started fishing, it was like 38. The next day it was like 41. Now we're starting to see like the crank kind of fire up a little bit, and there's half and half. So I'm guessing that water is approaching that, the mid 40 range. So we'll see what it's like when we get there, get back over there, try to look at some spots. But I was having a decent time with plastics.
Well, okay, hold on. I think that you're getting ahead of yourself, first of all, because you're just transitioning way right into a whole bunch of stuff here.
Yeah.
But wait a minute. So before we get to this, no, you keep up with what we're doing here tonight. So, because the reason is we have a show that's entitled The Alpha Project, a Trolling Motor Solution. And so I think way earlier, maybe Ryan asked, what is the topic tonight? And so the funny thing is we touch base with the Alpha Project yesterday. We tested the episode. They were super excited to be on, but we do not have our guest backstage. So if you are sitting here waiting on Trolling Motor Solutions, we can probably still get that link, and we will still put that in the chat.
Yeah, we'll bring that up.
You can check that out. But we will still talk to them either way. I imagine something came up. Life happens. They were so excited. So hang tight, because we do have all kinds of other stuff, and we did catch a bunch of walleye, and we had a ton of fun, and we are here to go through all of that. The other thing is, I'm just, I don't even know what the word I was going to describe myself. I'm just such a way that as I was looking around, I saw a lot of people with specific or similar struggles. So we are going to talk about some of the struggles that we saw people have on the river, so that you are not one of those people that is making or in that same scenario, right? So you, though, were talking about what did work, and I think that is a really fun place to start. And you had talked about plastics. So tell us a little bit more. What color, what shape, what this, what that, what worked about plastics?
Well, okay, first off, last weekend we had a few, sunnier days than we have lately. That and a little bit more meltwater was coming down. Just from the residual from our snowfall that we had. So a little bit of stained water and some high skies. I went with some bright colors. And honestly, like I started with the plastics, but I think like I used hair jigs. On the first day, Saturday, I used hair jigs. Tried to use vibe bait, and I was just tangling up all over the place, so I just took that off. That was user error. But then I was using plastics just because I wanted to cycle through some colors, because I kind of had an idea of what color that would work, but I just wanted to try other colors, because you can always go back to a color that's working if if you need to get your confidence back up, or if you just are done experimenting. But if you've got a couple fish in a row, it's worth changing colors just to see, because you might get a more consistent bite with something else, right?
And so in this case, you were using a minnow profile.
Yeah, the whole time was a minnow profile. And one piece of the puzzle I found out was that baits that were slimmer, so it didn't, the length didn't really matter too much. I know you had a couple bites on like a 3-inch minnow. I had like a 4-inch hair jig that I had tied up on a frostbite prop nose jig, which is a pretty cool thing. And that was in like a chartreuse pattern. Caught one on that. And then I had a green, they call it a pro minnow, the mold, but it's just like a very slim shiner shaped minnow that's like 3.5 inches or so. But we also have some bigger body baits that I tried too, and that didn't seem to work as well. That slimmer profile seemed to work a lot better. So the one thing that I will say, the difference between the two of us, because I caught a few more fish on Saturday and you had a couple bites, but you weren't able to connect. I was running stinger hooks all day. And so and I just default to a red stinger hook. I don't know why. That's just the 30 of them I tied up a couple of years ago. That's the ones that I have in my box. And so that's what I was using. And so I don't know if that was, kind of the key, but I do feel like it did help me put a few more fish in the boat. And that was it. No, there was no live bait in our boat. So we just jigged. Ask Emily how much we jigged. Jig,
here's the
jigged
reason
and
that
jigged and
he's
jigged
saying
and
this is
jigged and jigged.
because here's the thing is this time of the year, the spawn, and everybody is going out and catching fish, and everybody has a 30-inch fish and blah, blah, blah. And I think that is, not to get ahead of myself, but one of the reasons that people make some of the mistakes that we're going to talk about in a little bit. And so I had gotten a few bites, especially earlier in the day, but I had lost a pattern. Like it wasn't having to do with size of bait. It wasn't having to do with color. It wasn't having to do with this or that. And I changed my bait a whole bunch of
Hey,
times.
Conrad.
And that's the thing is it is just like jigging and jigging and jigging. And when you miss like one bite in the day, but then you only get 2 bites, but it also feels like you're in a river full of people that are all catching their PBs. It's a very, very, it can be very
Disheartening,
defeating.
yeah.
And you know, like that's the thing is you're an angler and so you fish and then you come back the next day and you do it again and then you catch a fish and then it's fine because that's exactly what happened, right? But you know, whatever it is that day, your cadence is off, you're this, you're that, whatever. And so it can be really hard to just continue that jig pattern. But one of the things that I did to change, I guess, to change my luck, because I was not catching fish on Saturday. When I came on Sunday, I started switching up everything, to be honest. I used, instead of a minnow, I'll use a crayfish. You know, I'll try, you know, all these different baits and just things that maybe other people might scoff at, or I don't know, I tried a few other baits, things that were even too light. The current wasn't even that heavy, but I was like, I'll try this. And it just, I cut it off, right? But it wasn't until I put a blade bait on, and I think it got me back to the right jig pattern, because when you have a blade bait and you rip it, it has a wiggle of effect. And so you're getting a little bit more like feedback as you're ripping it. I don't know. It feels better. It just got my cadence into a nice pattern. I don't know what it is. But that's the thing that you're able to do is switch it up until you find something that works for you. And so ultimately that's what happened. And I got a few other bites after that. And I think some of them were a little bit short bites. Can you put a stinger hook on a blade bait? I know that's not really a thing, right? That's not how it goes. But it was a lot more fun to catch fish, first of all, but do something different because I don't use blade baits all that often. So it was great.
Well, I think you missed a little bit of your technique too, and I think it's an important thing for everybody. I think it's an important lesson, not so much that it helped, but you added and attracted to your blade bait. And so you put a little something on the hook, and not that really is what that bait's for, because that's a reaction bait, right? But what it did was it gave you some confidence in that bait. You know, you're like, well, at least if I know that there's something that the fish would eat on it, then I'm taking that element out. And so it puts you on it. But now you caught a fish on it.
Can I say something? Because that's exactly what happened. That's exactly what happened in my mind. Because when you're seeing people around you catch fish in those boats, and you know what started to become the common theme in my mind is like, I have jigs, I have this, I have that, I have whatever they're using, but they had that I didn't was minnows. And that's never been the make it or break it. For me personally, I don't know, maybe like once or twice in my life, right? But on this day, I started to become convinced, shoot, that's what it is. But the cool thing is I have a whole bunch of stinky balls from show season, and I have stinky balls that are, dare I say, minnow flavor. I've never tried them, but it says that the flavor is minnow, so I believe them. And so what I did is I took that stinky ball and I put it on the blade bait. Now, the crazy thing about a blade bait, I almost feel like I should go and get one. You know what I'm talking about. The thing about a blade bait is it's almost that half moon shape, and so there's a treble hook off both ends, right? So you got 2 treble hooks, and I hooked it so that it was pretty even, but it was a little bit front heavy. So it kind of dives nose first a little bit. So I took the stinky ball and I did not put it on the back hook. I put it on the front hook, which is, I don't think something most people would do. But the reason I did that is because I just thought that it looked like, I don't know, a stupid little thing. I guess that doesn't make sense. But here's why I'm saying that is because it's a minnow. The blade bait is a minnow. And it was just chasing a stupid little thing. Whatever it's eating at, minnows peck at just like little things all the time. Like whatever it is in the water, that's what minnows are doing. And so I put that on there. And so as I was ripping it, a few of the rips would be kind of smaller. And I don't know, in my mind, it seemed like if that blade bait was a minnow, maybe it was chasing and eating something. I don't even know. That's the thing. Who knows, right? And so all that could just be totally crap. But in my mind, that's exactly, I had ruled out, okay, so everyone else, they have minnows, cool. Now mine is minnow scented, minnow flavored, like samesies. But I had even that playing field like as much as I could. And yeah, it gave me a lot more confidence. So it's an interesting way to think about that.
Yeah, and I think that's not only that, like if you're taking anything away from this, it shouldn't be just to blade baits, right? It should apply to all of your fishing. If you are having trouble trying a new technique or something, add something to it that'll give you confidence in it, because 9 times out of 10 it probably won't affect the action in the detrimental way that you think it would. It'll impart something. If you put you put a giant night crawler on the back of a tiny little inline spinner, that might not work. You have to size your baits or whatever you're doing appropriately. But I think just doing those little modifications and semi-permanent or not permanent modifications, I think anything that gets that bait in the water and helps you catch that first fish on it. Emily came home and had a bunch of ideas for other colors, and she added some eyeballs to stuff, and she's excited to now go out and use more of those blade baits. Doesn't necessarily have to have a stinky ball on it, because like she said, it worked
okay,
out
I tested the theory in the different passes. By the time I started testing it, we had 4 more passes in the day. One of them had a stinky ball, caught a fish. And then I had 2 passes, no stinky ball, no fish. Last pass, put a stinky ball back on, no fish.
Well, yeah, but that's not true. Like, I think every pass that we made, you had bites.
Yeah, like little bites. Yeah. So,
Yeah. So I mean, the lesson here is not so much that, they're biting on blade baits right now, which could or could not be the case, but the lesson is like, do what
works for you.
Yeah, use your baits in a way that makes you feel comfortable using them, and that'll make you more successful.
Well, and so that I'm almost going to say that in the opposite way, because that brings me to my first don't. And I think that this is especially in river systems and especially for walleyes. And here's why I'm going to say that. In these circumstances is when you're most likely to be packed in with other anglers. Sometimes in these river systems, it can feel like bumper boats, and not always. Hopefully you can get away from the crowd a little bit, because that will help you off the bat. But the first don't is don't feel like you have to do what other people are doing. Mm-hmm. I say that because when I had switched to the blade bait and started getting bites, here's what would happen is people would see with the blade bait, I was ripping a little bit bigger and harder than I would have if it was a jig in a plastic, or if it was flies, or if it was something else. People use all kinds of things on the rivers, right? But my blade bait was a bigger, harder rip than some of these other baits, because that's how you use that bait. But people saw like, oh, she missed a bite. And then all of a sudden they would take their jig and their minnow and they were ripping them and they were ripping them and they were ripping them. And it's like, oh my God, you're never going to catch that fish, right? Because it's about the application of what you're doing. And so have that confidence in that bait that you have, and don't feel like you need to use it the way that that boat or that person or whoever is, because they might be doing something totally different that you don't even realize. So the first don't is don't sit and watch everybody catch fish.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there's testament to that where we were kind of messing with people a little bit, and you jerk a little bit on your line, so your drink would go and everybody's head would turn, and then everybody would look at you like, you, and then they stop looking at you because you do it a couple times, and then you're one of those people that strips line without, so it's, you don't have to pay attention to people, except just don't run into them. And I guess, that's one thing that if we were going to talk a little bit about trolling tonight yet.
I don't know if we're going to get to it.
Well, I'm just saying, so on the river, what? So anyway, so on the river, you have the current, right? But you also a lot of times have a crosswind. And so you have to have your trolling motor on almost the whole day. And it's not like it's on like you're trolling, but you have to be able to control your boat, and you have to driving the boat, you have to keep your head up because there's always people going in and out, and it's either, they don't want to hit the wall, or they don't want to hit the bank, or whatever they're trying to reposition on their line. Or one thing that I find is a little bit precarious is that if you get your line stuck, like, try as much as you can during your drift to take it out. But if you have people immediately behind you, you really just need to point your rod down towards that snag and just pull constant pressure, and either the hook will bend or your line will snap. And because if you're trying to circle back and save your baits, you're disrupting like a whole flow of people, and it can get hairy.
I'm just listening. Yeah.
No, that I guess that's all I had on.
I'm just laughing because when we were in the boat, this is Josh's big like pet peeve of when people like get snagged and everything. So I was waiting for like a whole novel of ideas, to be honest.
I'm not going to rant about that. I know everybody was waiting for it. I'm not going to rant about
that. Okay, so the other thing that we see people do on the river, there was a lot of, we were talking before about technique. So there's a lot of different techniques that people use. And obviously you go out into any body of water and you are welcome to do any technique that you want at any point. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that we were seeing a lot of is people casting in all of these different drifting and trolling patterns. So, I mean, that's fine. If you choose to stop and drop anchor, I mean, that's up to you. And I mean, like how you fish and where you fish is kind of up to you. It's a free water system or whatever. We all know that. But the reason that I bring this up as being important is I think a lot of times the people that are casting are either maybe not totally sure what to do, or maybe even the people who got bored of jigging. And I think the reason that we say this is we see a lot of people casting out the things that they otherwise were jigging. So they're not necessarily even switching techniques or anything. But the other thing that we see is then once that person casts out, and then they get nervous because they realize that there's somebody else drifting right down the river towards the way. So they cast out and they reel it in really, 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 really fast. And then they feel like they missed the fish or they didn't get a bite. And so they cast out again and they reel it in really, really, really super fast. And that is cool. And that's great. And you can sit and you can do that all day long. But when you think about the river system, what you want to do is be fishing where the fish are. And I guess that's for lakes or for anywhere that you are. Fish where the fish are. And that sounds obvious. But in that river system, the fish, especially with the boat traffic, are almost certainly not going to be in that top 1 or 2 feet of that water column. So I'm not here knocking on casting or retrieving or any technique that people choose. But when you do see people that are casting out and reeling in super fast, that's not giving that bait the opportunity to even reach where the fish are. So I think a lot of times people are casting out in an effort to, not be bored. But I think what they're doing is actually removing themselves from the actual fish and that bite window even more. And so I think that's really great. That's why we started talking about blade baits and all of that in the beginning is, switch to something that is going to work for you. And again, if you feel like casting it's what's going to work for you, like go for it, try something because you never really know. Sometimes the oddest technique is what's going to pull through. But especially if you're in a boat with somebody, if they don't even know that, maybe the person doesn't realize that they're not putting themselves in that way where the fish are. So
Kevin, you bring up a really good point. And I want to make this pretty clear is that I haven't always had a boat up until the last 5-6 years, maybe. I was a shore fisherman like my whole life, and you can definitely catch walleyes from the shore this time of year, especially going into the next month and a half. It's definitely possible. It's a little bit easier going into May if you get some waders, you can get into some spots and be able to cast crankbaits in some of the areas in the Wolf River system. As far as going over by the bay, like, dude, just cast out, go get some blade baits and cast those out and just rip them back and reel down and rip them back. You can get jig heads and twisters. Like one of my favorites is always a white jig head with a white twister. 3-inch twister, white jig head, and you cast it out, let it sink, then you just pop it off the bottom and let it sink back down. You just reel up your line, feel, and you can do that. You can do that with hair jigs. You can do that with anything, and that's the great thing about Wisconsin this time of year. Emily says fish where the fish are, and pretty much if you're in or near a river, that's where the fish are. And I think that's an important thing to caveat Emily talking about, like, keeping your bait in the strike zone. If you're catching a few fish on a pass and then you get over, there's a bunch of boats that kind of come through or whatever, and you need a little bit more space, just find a different spot of the river that has a little space. There's fish there.
But when we're talking about bank fishing, you don't always have that luxury, right? And so that's an okay thing, because you don't always have to be moving spots, right? The thing about the river is that the water's moving and the fish are moving. Mm-hmm. And so you don't need to be moving when everything else is. The reason in a lake that it's best to have a boat and to be moving around so much is because the fish aren't, doing that same thing like that river system. Yeah. But Kevin, you wish you had a boat to go fishing for walleyes. I mean, here's the great thing about river systems and the spawn and walleyes and them going upstream is, especially in years when you have current in that river, right? So you have all that water that's rushing down and those walleyes are going against it. And so here's the first thing. When we're talking about the walleyes, they're probably not at that top, or any fish on that top foot of water. The walleyes aren't at the top of the water. And that's because that flow is really high up there, right? And so if you're a fish that is going to have to travel a very large amount of stream, what they're doing is they're looking for those places that don't have that huge amount of flow going through that they're having to like run against. And so a lot of times what you're seeing is those fish, yes, they go along the bottom because that current is, I think, that tiny bit less right along that bottom. But if you think of a river, they kind of go up like a bowl, like if it's very long, right? And so those fish will sometimes pull up the sides of that river system because, like the bottom where there's a little bit extra current, sometimes there's that little bit of less current on those sides. There's less current. And so they use those areas to travel there, right? And so one of the things that I was watching this year is the Wolf River cams. And, we talk about this all the time. They put them out there. You see the fish go by, yada, yada. Some days it's a lot. Some days it's almost none. But watch those posts close, because all of a sudden one day he'll say something like, oh, hey, I moved the cams 5 feet shallower, and in a river, that's like a lot. He's almost fishing at the bank at that point. He's like, but that's where the fish are. Wouldn't you know it? And so it's funny because if you have that tip that those fish are running closer to that bank, you might go out there and you'll see everybody and they're all casting into the middle of the river and casting and casting. The boats are jigging in the middle of the river and they might not be catching that much. And I can tell you, I actually see this posted on Green Bay Junkies all the time. And there are people who will go to these river systems and they are fishing shallower and they are kind of secretly catching fish. So if you're wondering, how are these people doing it? Sometimes on a rare occasion, these short anglers kind of have that benefit. And so I know that's a really unique thing and that's not always the case, but especially this time of the year, this is when you're able to get out and do that. Before we get ahead of ourselves, I think our guest is tuning in. But before we get there, I have one more thing to say about what we were talking about. So I'm going to make this point really quick. We were talking about river do's and don'ts. And this last one, I think, is maybe the most important one. And that's why I think it's worth mentioning. We're talking about all these things. Don't do this, don't do that, whatever. But it's all about catching fish. So let's think of that moment where you do not just get a bite, but you connect, right? You have the fish on the end of your line and you are reeling it in. Especially in the case of big fish, right? Because sometimes little fish, you don't have this and you can just reel them in and it's just great and lift them into the boat and high five and happy day, right? But when you have a big fish, what's going to happen is that it's going to start pulling drag. That fish is going to go. If you have drag coming out of your reel, and you're also reeling in, what that's doing is a line's going out and trying to be pulled in at the same time. And that creates stress points. And that is how lines break, and that's how fish get lost. And it's so sad. It's so sad because sometimes when you see in the river and somebody is on a fish, you can tell, like, man, they are not used to this, and they're reeling against that drag, and it just is. You hear the clicking of the drag, and they're reeling, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, line broke, and it's just that it can be avoidable.
Well, and part of that is the additional line twist that you're putting into there, because your line isn't spooling, it's just twisting because it's also getting pulled out. So all you're doing is tightening the twist if you have braid, or just twisting your mono. And then, like Emily said, twisting it to a point where it gets so tight and then it just snaps. And so you just have to make sure you either adjust your drag, but if you're not that familiar with your reel or whatever you're doing, just wait for the fish to stop, because eventually it'll stop, or just touch the reel with your hand and then reel down and then just lift up. And then if it starts going again, just let it go. And that's what the drag is there for. So just don't fight it. Let the fish fight it.
Okay, so not too hard shift topics, but I think no matter what you're fishing for, whether it is walleyes or something else, and if you're bank fishing, I guess that's a little bit different too, right? But for anybody who is looking for boat control, I think tonight is going to be a great thing for you to be a part of. So normally we perhaps got a little bit more before the show, but thanks so much for being here. Show live.
I was talking about fishing with somebody else.
Oh, that's so funny. Well, thanks so much for being
sometimes those conversations go a little long, but just to add to your point with the drag and everything, if anybody is listening and you're using bait caster reel, thumbing that spool is a really good technique to get a handle on. And if I've got a client with me and they need some education on that, I have them throw a jerk bait with your drag turned back quite a bit and thumb the spool every time you jerk. Okay. And then when a fish hits, it's instinctive. You're jerking and you're clamping that thumb down to get that hook set, and then you're letting off and you're letting the reel do the work. Especially in musky fishing nowadays, these reels have so much drag. I think of all these world record fish that were caught 60 years ago on 12-pound drag reels. Now everything's 30 pound, 40, 22 pound. It's insane. You're ripping hooks out, but not to mention, and more to your point, putting more stress on that fishing line in a river where you get nicks and whatever in it from rocks and stumps and all that. The fish will find the weak point and win if you, So, but boat control is important. Rivers, lakes, anything.
Well, before we jump too far in, we're just kind of meeting you, I guess, online, virtually, but meeting you here for the first time tonight. I think a lot of other people are as well. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name's Scott Eben, the creator of the Alpha Project. Live here in Antigo, Wisconsin for going on about 5 years now. And I love fishing like the Green Bay area, out on the bay. I love the Eagle River area. And, we've got enough lakes around here too to keep things interesting for a short trip. So, it's a great location for that, being so close to everything. And small town I've always loved living in a small town. This is probably one of the biggest towns I've ever lived in. So yeah, love that. Grew up on farm, dairy farm, and then till I was like 10ish, and then actually worked on farm just like throughout high school and whatever, baling hay and taking care of cattle and whatever. But,
fishing.
Yeah, then I worked retail for 20 plus years and came up with this idea one day, off grid fishing and looking for ways to extend the runtime on my trolling motor batteries, and found all these other benefits to just after further developing the concept. That's what it's all about now. It's started with a concept and then product testers giving me feedback. Everything's feedback driven now. Everything that exists is because of someone didn't like this, they liked this, and they wanted more of this. So now basically we have all of that information so that we can build a unit made not only for someone's trolling motor, but how they fish. And that's pretty important. If somebody's constantly fishing rivers, they may need something weighted and sized slightly different than someone that's fishing calm, the bluebird sky days on a calm lake. So yeah, it's been.
So if I can ask this
Yeah.
question first, you're talking about adding something to a trolling motor. So I myself have a trolling motor that I know that we swear at all the time. And on Sundays it's great, and on Sundays it's not. So what prompted you to build something to add on, or how do you think that you can impact that trolling motor? Tell us about that.
Well, it's a funny story, but you can Google avocado hand. It's a thing. And it sounds like it's got nothing to do with fishing, but I was on the second day of a muskie fishing trip, and I'm off grid, and I'm a caster, to the core, and I love avocados. That's one of my favorite things to eat in a boat, at camp, whatever. They're so good for you and easy. Well, avocado hand is when you suffer nerve damage, tendon damage from your knife when you're trying to get that pit out of the avocado. And that's what I did. I stabbed myself right in the hand here. This finger right here feels like it's asleep still. This is 7 years later. So casting, 9-inch baits, big buck tip, that's out of the question for the rest of the week. This was on Kentuck Lake, just east of Eagle River, and I just love that lake for muskie fishing. And well, I had an iPilot trolling motor, and I had all of my fishing areas programmed in to the GPS on that. So like, well, trolling had just been legalized again, in 2015 or 2016. I hadn't really got into it, but it's like, hey, one more tool to put fish in the boat. I'm like, well, start trolling. So I was using the trolling motor for the guidance of these spots that were fishy spots. I was using that, and then, to get 2, 3, 4 miles an hour, the speed I was using to make the baits work, I was using the gas motor. Well, now you see everybody doing that. Back then, like, I looked like the biggest idiot on the lake. Why does he got his trolling? Pointing, he's got his trolling motor down with the gas motor. Like, everybody's doing it. It's like putting your boat in 4-wheel drive with a push pull. Well, it comes at a cost, and that's runtime. Again, this is off grid, so I had done a lot of these off grid trips prior to that. So I'd always have like 3 sets of batteries and a generator. Well, that particular campground there, to run your generator, you have to be on site, and you can run it anytime you want during the day, but you have to be on site. So that takes away your fishing time. So that's why I had extra batteries, and then I wait for rainy days, charge batteries up, stuff like that, kind of, because I wanted to be out 10, 12, 15-hour days. Well, my runtime on my old 12-volt Minn Kota there, fishing like that, was about 5 hours. Instead of, getting a good day or day and a half out when I was casting, just it took so much more power to maintain those turns. And I run cheap batteries, $100 lead acid batteries, and I don't think lithium was even a thing then. So throughout the course of this week, I'm catching fish. Like, first day out, I'm trolling crankbaits for muskies and catching 26-inch walleyes, and I got my limit of walleyes. I'm like, wow, this is great. It'd be great to catch a muskie, but I'll take it. They were tasty. But I was just thinking, like, there's got to be a way to make this more efficient, because this is really slick, and I can control the boat with my remote control anywhere in the boat, and catch fish, have good time. If you're tied to the tiller, you're tied to the steering wheel, you can't check for weeds as easily. You got to go hop back on the steering wheel every 30 seconds. Otherwise, you're going to run into something. And that, using that GPS, like, wow, that's just slick. So it was coming to be the last day of that trip, in the Sunday morning, and got to go back to work Monday. So starting to break camp, and it's like, I think I got enough battery juice to, maybe fish a couple hours. And I had, at some point during the week, I thought of this concept of like a wedge kind of rudder on the trolling motor. And uh, I was packing up camp and I went to put my cordless drill in the case and I grabbed it and I was closing it and I stopped for a second and I opened back up. It was kind of like one of those, huh. I ran right down, my boat was in the water. I ran right down the boat with a bungee cord in this case and I clamped it on there. I hopped in the boat, went out, and I'm like, holy cow, I can turn like without using power. Like, huh. And your steering takes zero juice really. It's that thrust to power that trolling motor. Um, so, long story short, that was like the very first prototype. Like, hey, this works. Uh, it's not safe. Don't try that. If you're standing up and making that thing, that a bungee cordless drill case will take you 90 degrees, in the blink of an eye, and you end up getting wet. But hey, it was kind of a proof of concept moment. And then some point between then, I typically take 2-3 week long trips like that. And like, well, my hand is still, 5 days later, my hand is still really painful. I'm like, I expect that to be, they've stitched it up and said, yeah, you got some nerve damage and you'd have 3 surgeries and maybe get some feeling back. But after a week, it's like I could use the finger and it just hurt. But I tried casting and then wasn't going to be casting. So I was like, well, I guess I'm trolling for a while. Well, we got to figure out get more sets of batteries or figure something out. And I happened to stumble upon something in my garage that I was able to just bolt on and create a better backyard heck job uh, prototype. And I put that on, and yeah, all of a sudden, instead of that 5-6 hours, maybe 8 hours, I could go for 2 days on one 12-volt battery. And I was like, wow, that's cool. So this is June of 2017. Like for 3 years, it was just for me, like just for these trips. Like it took me about 10 minutes to put this thing on when I got to the lake, 10 minutes to take it off and bolt it together. And you couldn't stow the motor really for transport with it on there. And then June, July, in that time frame of 2020, got a new boat, new trolling motor, much more powerful trolling motor, and it had built-in transducer, which so many of them now do. And the geometry just wasn't going to work with. I wish I had a picture of my trolling motor. I got holes drilled. I wanted this thing because now I was back to like, it doesn't matter that I had brand new batteries, brand new trolling motor. Fishing that way, I was still going to get 6-8 hours of run time. And, off grid, it's a pain in the butt. I wasn't going to swap batteries anymore. It's like I'd be sitting at camp and, just waiting, doing whatever instead of fishing. And yeah, I drilled holes through the skag of the trolling motor to try to make this work, and made a vertical version of my wedge, and it helped a little bit, but it was kind of almost like going back to that cordless drill case where it would kind of whip you, like it would work against you in some ways. So then, kind of fast forward, struggled that the rest of that year. Got in the wintertime, I started like, okay, I got to figure this out. Where do you go when you got to figure something out? Social media, right? So I go on Marketplace and I'm just looking like engineering, 3D printing was starting to be a thing. This was what, three years ago now, 3 winters ago. And I found a listing, somebody that does CAD work, CNC, 3D print, and he's got pictures of work he did. That's the guy. So I sent him a message and said, hey, I'm working on this it's for fishing. I gotta, it's still just for me. Like I just wanted just something to help. I got some ideas on how we can make this work with this big transducer and whatever. So a couple messages back and forth. We met up about a week later. I left my $3,000 trolling motor in his possession, just meeting this kid. He was an engineering student. But hey, one nice thing about COVID, instead of being in Platteville for school, he was just down the road or down Highway 45, a few miles, doing everything online. So yeah, about a week later, he starts sending me pictures. I'm like, okay, we'll do this and do this and do this. We went through like 20 different things, and he sends me like a rendition, and he's got different views in it. Like, it kind of clicked. Like, it looks like a boat. If you look at what we have, it's pointy in the front. It gets wider. It's wide at the top, and it gets narrower. Like, I saw it. It's just okay. If I'm a captain of a submarine, which is what your trolling motor looks like, and I want to make a turn, I expect my turn to go. We've seen it in the movies. Submarines go, they turn like this. How does a boat turn? Well, however you want, right? You turn the motor and you steer. So like, okay, I think we're onto something. So he 3D printed one. We filled it up with some resin just to give it some strength. And a couple weeks later, I went out on Green Bay. I took 2 sets of batteries with me, so I could just do like a little runtime test, compare. So I went out for 4 hours without this attachment on, and I was trolling, whatever. Took those batteries out, put the other batteries in, with the fin on, and went out. And this was on Green Bay. Went to Marinette and just went out in the bay. I wasn't even fishing. I was just like, that was really boring. Like, there was water temps were like 35. It was in March, and like, I'm just reading, playing a game on my phone, whatever, to occupy my time. And I get home, test everything out, and that testing right there, it was right around 6 times the runtime in that short comparison. So like, okay, well, and I know it's like steering. Holy cow! Like, I could just cut, and this is in Group A. There's some chop, there's some wind, and I'm just cutting. I'm like, holy cow! And it just feels like it's effortless. If you want to turn, you just turn, like that boat compared to the submarine. And like, wow, you're a train on the tracks. And well, had a few more ideas, and that was like this big. It was basically a prototype version of these 2 pieces together that didn't separate. And I got to thinking about that, and like, this is hanging off the end of my trolling motor in the garage. I'm gonna walk around the corner of the boat and whack myself in the head. I'm like, and plus, if I'm not trolling, if you get in current, whatever, it could, the forces will possibly work against you. So we came up with the slide apart design. Went on and tested that. Like, yeah, that's great. And then I went into the river I took that fin off. And I went in the river. I'm like, okay, how is this going to fish in current, with this surface area versus nothing? And I tell you what, the boat was steadier. You spot lock in the current, and instead of the trolling motor going like this and the back end of the boat going, exaggerated even more, it held those little headings that spot lock sets up much steadier. And around the back of the boat, you're not getting rocked around. Like, okay. So then what do you do next? I talked to the guy when I had that original idea 4 years earlier, a good friend of mine that knows almost everything about boat control and electronics and all that. I had sent him that idea when I thought of it before I even tried it. And he said it wouldn't work. It wouldn't turn you fast enough. So I said, well, there's my first test unit. So I made him a test unit. This day 1 take, this thing's phenomenal. I can't believe how fast I can turn and use less power and all this. So that was kind of the start of it. Throughout the 2021, 22 seasons, just found more people, different fishing styles, drifters, casters, trollers. I do everything now. It took till about 2021 where I could actually cast for a full day again, with that finger, where it didn't, like, I had changed if you're ever in a boat with me, don't look at my mechanics for casting. It's a bad example because I had to change how I grip everything. Like, it's a workout for me to cast, but it doesn't give me shooting pains in my finger anymore. Uh, but yeah, that was kind of the start of the testing. Hard, good mix, hardcore fishermen, kind of the weekend warriors. Uh, some of the best guides out on Green Bay. Sent a couple units to Minnesota and Kentucky and Oregon. Just people that, like, social media, like, they've got this problem. Like, you want to try this? Let me know what you think. And like, instantly, like, people try it for the first time. Like, oh yeah. I was trying to find some hate to it. Like, how can I make it better? and with that feedback, and just start asking questions like, oh yeah, I guess you could do this and we do this. And so we went through between 2021 and really even up until the beginning of this year, about 35 different little changes, just slight tweaks that, it worked on this version and we changed this and then we went back to a reverted version to become what it is. And, this I've got, so you basically have this adaptable base that clamps to the underside of your trolling motor. This one is made for a motor with a built-in transducer like I have. So it cut us all around. There's a little pad on there to protect that transducer. And this is really low profile. Again, with that boat shape, better control. And then there's two fins. This is we call this alpha. This is beta and delta. So a couple different attachments, and we're working on. We've got some other stuff for different accessories that you can go right in that track. It's modular, and we basically do it as a kit because one thing, I've got an 18-foot deep V hull. Test boats range from 14-foot, traditional V to 24-foot, basically like a cuddy cabin kind of boat, and a lot of like your 619, 621 Rangers and boats like that. And the experience with the different heights, the different sizes of blades varied a little bit. Like I've got a tin boat. That big blade is pretty much what I use all the time. The guy with the 619 Ranger using the little blade he's got a heavier boat, so it's a little lower in the water. Doesn't need quite as much surface area for that drifting. It's basically like a drift sock for drifting without using any power, and you don't have to remember to try to pull it in and drag it across the lake before you. I've seen that happen before. But yeah, all that feedback. That's where this smaller fin came. We're like, oh, can you make? What do you think about thinner? Like, well, the materials and whatever. Like, okay, so there's some limitations. Let me test some materials. So we found materials that I could take a 1/4-inch piece of the material that's in here, throw it in a freezer, and then whack it with a hammer. And it took like 5-6 whacks to get a crack in it. It's gonna take some abuse. I've run down at Lake Petenwell, running stumps like intentionally trying to hit stumps with it, and I was pretty successful. But it took like 8 hours of doing that to get a crack, in this thing. Like, wow, that's durable. But the way mine works is durability a good thing? In most cases, it is. But I've got a $3,000 trolling motor. Do I want it to be the weak point? So then we came up with, instead of this being that solid material, this is basically just the 3D printed shell plastic. Basically the amount of force at about a little over 2 miles an hour. If you smoke something, it's designed to be like a shear pin. If you hit something on this side, it can crack, and it can actually let the blade come out of the track to relieve that strain, like a crumple zone. Okay, well, you're not like out of luck or anything. Everything floats. These float. Every piece, we can alter the buoyancy depending on so many fish, but everything we make floats. And there's actually a quick attach. Let's see that.
Mm-hmm.
See if you've seen these fast hatch leaders. I've got a guy that builds these to my spec here, so you can put that blade on. This would be anchored to the blade, and just like that, you got a seat belt holding that all together. You want to take the blade off, just like that. No tools. I've been in 2-3 foot chop. It's not. You just go up to the front of the boat and twist, pop it off. It's the guy that kind of like helped think about that system. Like, wow, that was just a key moment there. I ran a lot of them without any retainer. I never really had a problem. I made them really tight so that it took a lot of force. So when you were taking it off, you really had to give it a pop. But now I can have it set real nice and loose. So it's just a couple of pounds of pressure. It's funny. Somebody's saying, "Oh, why don't you just machine that?" Well, the angle changes from front to back. So when you start, it starts super easy, and then a little bit of resistance at the end, and then that retainer boop, keeps it all together there for you. But yeah, feedback. Still, we have a for life program. You buy one, you change your trolling motors. You want to change something. Everyone has input into the project. That's why we call it a project, because it's ever evolving. So by the first of this year, we had basically everything covered from Minn Kota except for the new Quest models. That's almost all ironed out here to launch May, June. And then Motor Guy, Garmin, Lowrance. Lowrance is on the list. Garmin and Motor Guide are in testing right now. So uh, it's been fun. And so far, the feedback on those is that, yeah, there might be one or two other real changes, but the shape, all of that geometry seems to be working, and so far so good.
That's awesome. No, all of that sounds really cool. I mean, when you first take a look at it, it almost looks like a solid piece of like aluminum or something, but it's really cool that it's a polymer.
Yeah,
And
this is
it's
kind
awesome.
of our yeah.
Well, it's awesome that you guys thought about the breakaway aspect of it too, because that's something
right.
that maybe not a lot of people would have thought about, you know, because you think
Right.
about trolling a lot in open water, and for people like Emily and I, we're like shallow water trollers, so we troll a lot for panfish,
Sure.
and so we run into a lot of stuff like weeds and logs and rocks and what have you, and and then you hear it or you feel it, and you just have to bump the trolling motor up a little bit, but like that's awesome that you thought about that.
Yeah, and and it all started with trolling because that was how I was forced to fish in that runtime problem. But along the way, like just from other people using it as a drifting as in that current, like we found all of these other things and just like slightly little tweaks we made along the way made it more like a Swiss Army knife for just about any you know any kind of fishing. And um, the
So we're running
the
we're running just a tad bit long here, but I did want to pull up the Kickstarter if you don't, or the Kickstarter if you don't mind.
yes.
Let me see if I can share my screen here. There you go. So it looks like there's 49 hours left on it. Is that right?
Yeah, that's going to end 10 o'clock, I believe, Saturday night.
And
So
it looks like you got a pledge amount of $1.
yeah, you can go anywhere from $1 up to, I believe, 300 was the
Yeah, you got
450,
$1, 16, 40, 175, 300. That's awesome.
Yeah, we've got we do have a DIY program. So someone with access to a 3D printer we'll give them the design and some guidelines. So you can do it really low cost on a budget, all the way up to custom built, made to fit your motor, made to fit how you fish, and complement your rig.
That's awesome.
It's been a lot of fun.
Cool. I'll throw this link in the comments.
And then do you have like a website in addition? Do you have a Facebook page?
No, we're running the Kickstarter. We did our debut at the Wisconsin Muskie Expo in March, and then it's like how many we plan on rolling out to some dealers here really quickly, and then we have the Facebook page for the Alpha Project. We're creating a build list. We're going to start shipping units here at the end of April, first part of May. And we're building our build list. No money down. When it's ready, we'll let you know because there's there's a lot of chemical bonding and things that it takes some time for the production. And you can only make so many ahead of time when you don't know what the need is going to be for the user. So right now, yeah, that's the program. Get on the build list, and we take it from there. And but yeah,
You
we
do
have
have you have a Facebook.
we have Facebook. Yeah, the Alpha Project on Facebook, and we have talked about the website a little bit. It's like, well, I mean, marketplace is kind of almost taken over on everything, and it's free. Like, well, every time I add, to what it costs to operate, we
Hmm.
kind of increase the cost. I want to keep it. All these, a lot of these product testers, I kind of did a survey as far as pricing, and a lot of the suggestions were in the $250 to $350 range for product. And I go, well, I want to be under 200 if I can. So
Hmm.
that's what
Nice.
our goal is, and it's like we put the money into the development and into the quality of the product, and people are finding it,
Yeah.
through the shows, and we've been discussing some really fun marketing ideas that we're gonna do this summer. So
Nice.
it's yeah, it's gonna be a blast.
That is so cool. And we are definitely looking forward to following along on your Facebook page. And it looks like you got a lot of great stuff to come. So we're looking forward to hearing about all
Yeah,
that.
Yeah.
yeah, we're gonna get a lot more performance footage, underwater footage. We got some camera systems uh, coming in to help do that, because we so much of the trolling aspects using less thrust. I'm actually running zero thrust for almost all of my trolling using that GPS. So my $100 lead acid batteries, honestly, if I wasn't bored of trolling well, all day, I could go 6, 7, 8 days like that instead
Wow.
of that 8 hours. And that's where that runtime, the runtime is really extended. But
That's
yeah,
awesome.
well, I really appreciate you having me here. It's been fun.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool that you're local to our area, right? But local to the Midwest. I think there's a lot of
Yeah,
people on here
Hmm.
that know and love the Midwest and supporting local businesses. So we are so excited to see the future.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for joining us to talk about this.
thank you for having me.
Yeah. And to the people at home, this has been a super fun episode, and looking forward to catching more fish this weekend and talking to everybody on next week's edition of the Night Bite.
Night,